On the evening of June 10th, 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barclay called home from a basketball court 2 miles from his house in San Antonio. He wanted a ride, and his older brother Jason answered. Jason told Nicholas that their mom was asleep after getting home from working a graveyard shift and that Nicholas would have to walk back home by himself. And this was the last verifiable time anybody spoke to Nicholas. 3 days later, on June 13th, Nicholas' family reported him missing. Then, 3.5 years go by with absolutely nothing. No sightings, no leads, no body, nothing at all. Then, in October of 1997, the phone rang in San Antonio. A children's shelter in southern Spain had a teenage boy in their care. He had refused to give his name for days. He had visible scars, and when he finally spoke, he said he was American. He said he had been kidnapped, and he said that his name was Nicholas Barclay. What happened over the next 5 months is one of the strangest modern missing person cases in history. It is genuinely mind-boggling and unbelievable that this is a real thing. Before we get to that shelter in Spain, we need to talk about our sponsor for today's video. Just kidding. There are 2 boys that you need to understand to get the scope of this story. The first is obviously Nicholas Barclay. Nicholas was a troubled child. Rumors of him physically abusing his mother, Beverly, were fluctuating around the time of his disappearance. He had previously threatened a teacher, broken into a convenience store, and even stolen a pair of sneakers. There were multiple substance abuse issues in his own household as well, and his mother Beverly was addicted to heroin and abused alcohol. His brother Jason was also addicted to cocaine during this time. Beverly, Nicholas' mom, was a single mother by 1994. Her husband had left years before. She was working graveyard shifts to keep rent paid and sleeping during the day when Nicholas was at school and using heroin in the gaps between. Jason, Nicholas' older brother, was 25 years old. He was 6'2", 200 and some pounds, and deep into the white stuff. Cocaina. The police had been to the house more than once to break up fights between him and his own mother. Carey, the only one of the Dollarhide kids with a life that had a shape to it, had moved out at 18 years old and married a fellow by the name of Brian Gibson and was raising her own son, Cody, across town. By the way, Dollarhide, Barclay, different fathers, same family. Beverly's the mom, Nicholas is the son, Jason is the son, Carey is the daughter. When this happened back in 1994, that left Nicholas at age 13 in a house where the adults were not really paying attention to a kid who desperately needed it. Back on June 10th, 1994, Nicholas was playing basketball with some friends 2 miles from his home. He called home asking if it was possible to get a ride back, and Jason would answer and tell him their mom was asleep and he would have to just walk back. Nicholas did not return on that night. The family reported him missing on June 13th, 1994, and the 3-day delay might seem strange for most normal people, but it was not abnormal for Nicholas to disappear for 1 or 2 days at a time at this point in his life. This may or may not have influenced why his mother didn't report him after 3 full days, because he was just gone longer than he was normally gone. That, and he also had a hearing about his prior offenses the next morning. So he had court the day that he didn't come home. So there's a few excuses to justify an absence. On September 25th, 1994, 3 months later, Jason did claim to see Nicholas trying to break into their garage. The police responded to find no trace at all of Nicholas. Some investigators, and by that I mean speculators on the internet, believe that this could have been a drug-induced hallucination of Jason's, but there is no evidence that Jason took any drugs that would have possibly resulted in such a bizarre hallucination. Then over 3 years goes by. Clothes are still in the closet, the walls are still posted with Nicholas's postings, the bed still made the way a 13-year-old makes a bed, untouched. Nicholas just magically shows up, or rather, another boy who just claims to be Nicholas shows up. First, we need to explain who that other boy is. Half a world away from San Antonio in a small village in central France, there was a teenager already deep into a career that would, in a few years, lead him directly to the Barclay family, pretending to be their son, Nicholas, who had gone missing 3 years prior. This second boy's name was Frédéric Bourdin. Bourdin, the imposter, was born to a French mother and an Algerian father, and he faced racism from his own family. He was unwanted by his family, and that troubled him deeply. By Bourdin's own account, once his family knew of his father's ethnicity, they ordered his mother to have an abortion and resented her for never getting one. His mom was only 18 years old when he was born, and his father, a married Algerian immigrant named Carey, 25 years old at the time, disappeared before Bourdin was was old enough to even know him. Bourdin, at 2.5 years old, was placed with his grandparents, and they moved with him to a small village called Mouchon, southeast of Nantes. It was a conservative and rural village, the kind of village where a mixed-race kid with no father and secondhand clothes really stood out. He drifted through foster homes and institutions through most of his childhood, and he has said in interviews that he started walking into shelters and claiming to be other children at age 12. By the time Bourdin was 18, he had already adopted a dozen fake identities. And in November of 1993, that was his first time impersonating a child when he was legally an adult. He once even faked his own death in an attempt to be cruel to his family, who had been so cruel to him in the past. In the mid-90s, Bourdin was even invited on a French TV show called Everything Is Possible, where he talked about his intentions and why he did what he did. He made the claim that all he wanted was love and a family, and during this time, a fan would make a website dedicated to his ability to take on new identities, aka impersonate people as a literal imposter. That is a crazy ability to have, to brag about and have fans over. When Bourdin tells these stories, they seem rehearsed. They feel rehearsed as they're being told, as though they're trying to get a reaction out of those that he is talking to. It's a show. It's a performance.
You are a chameleon.
Of course, I've been a chameleon all my life. I mean, someone who never have the same skin, who change colors, and I'm capable of doing it. It's very hard to explain. It's just that I guess you are who you want to be.
Because of how he has lived his life, it is believed that the story you get from Bourdin is now only a half-truth, and the real truth is somewhere in those details he shares. He's obviously not all there, guys. Like, regardless of a tragic life, Bourdin is not a reasonable, rational, reliable source of information. Very important to note, okay?
For years you created these identities and personas. At some point you decided you were going to steal one.
It wasn't a decision. I was forced to do it. It was either that or go to prison.
He's used his tragic life to ultimately justify his behavior and his compulsion to lie and impersonate. The reason for all of it is that it is ultimately the search for love and caring that he never received in his childhood. And if he had not assumed the identity of Nicholas Barclay, he implies he would not be alive today in interviews. By the fall of 1997, Bourdin is 23 years old, fluent in 5 languages, wanted by Interpol for impersonating real and imaginary missing children across at least a dozen European countries, and running out of places to be Frédéric Bourdin. What a grift. That is crazy. Look at the back of a milk carton. I think I'll be him to get some love and attention today. So, things are about to get very strange. October 7th, 1997, Linares, Spain. The Spanish police receive a phone call about a frightened boy in a phone booth. Strangely enough, the phone call came from a man that was also the frightened boy in the phone booth that was pretending to be Nicholas Barclay.
When the police arrived, I have immediately to put into their mind that they have a kid in front of them, not an adult. So it was very important for me to behave like one.
What a con. More than once in Bourdin's career of stealing children's identities, he would call the police from a phone booth and claim that there was a young boy around 14 there. He would then try and find a missing boy of the nationality he said he could pass as. The first time he did this, he was 16 and claimed to be a missing British 14-year-old. This was his MO. Have the police scoop him up and assume the identity of someone else before anyone could notice they had him in custody. Spanish police in Linares took him to a shelter. He refused to give his name for days. Local social workers got nowhere. But eventually, a Spanish judge gave the shelter a 24-hour ultimatum. It was this ultimatum that triggered Bourdin's next move.
So the only thing left there was 1, go to prison, 2, prove to them that I'm someone.
He's left alone for 8 hours that night to contact his family. Except he does not contact his family. The call he makes is to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Alexandria, Virginia. And he does not introduce himself as a runaway boy looking for his parents. He introduces himself as the shelter's director, a man named Jonathan Durian, who has a frightened kid in his care who won't give his name, who matches the description of. And then Bourdin describes himself.
I described myself. Every details I gave was details that I know that I could handle.
The NCMEC operator runs it against the database and tells him that this sounds like Nicholas Barclay, missing from San Antonio since 1994. Then he faxes over the file. Bourdin would then begin the task of attempting to look as much like Nicholas as possible, taking a razor to himself to have matching scars he knew that Nicholas had, getting matching tattoos, and dyeing his hair blonde. All information that he garnered from social engineering. That's how it's really wild, but it gets even stranger. You got to think, your missing son comes home, the gig's up. That's not my son. It looks nothing like my son. So then he calls the Barclay family. Regardless of the differences in appearance, age, nationality, and language, when Nicholas's sister Carey met Bourdin, she confirmed that it was her brother Nicholas. Carey gets on a plane, flies to Madrid, and when she lands, she meets Bourdin for the first time at the US consulate, sitting across a small table in a windowless interview room. Bourdin's hair is dyed, he's carved scars into his own skin to match the ones that Nicholas had, and totally prepared the cover story. Carey, upon immediately meeting Nicholas, confirmed that it was him.
Just seeing, touching, kissing, holding him.
The hell, you know?
Now, we gotta remind everyone, Bourdin has brown eyes. Nicholas Barclay had blue eyes. He was also missing a distinctive cross tattoo on his hand that was unknown to Bourdin at the time. He was also 6.5 years older than Nicholas and had a French accent. To be fair, he did wear items purposefully to obscure himself from Carey and to obfuscate his true identity as much as he possibly could. Because he was an imposter, dude! To explain away how Nicholas looked so different, Bourdin claimed he escaped from a child sex ring run by US military officials. No way that could be true, right? It's definitely a thing. I don't know about the US government, but we've got that's a real issue. So lying about it's kind of evil, but that is a real thing. A la Epstein. Plenty of evidence. There we go. It was in this sex ring, Bourdin said, that the government officials injected dye into his eyes to make them a different color, forced him to speak only French so he'd forget his English, and the trauma had aged him, and he finally escaped in Spain. That, I shall remind you, is the story that the United States consulate accepted. The State Department officer who issued Bourdin a passport, the document is real, his name is on it as Nicholas Patrick Barclay. That officer heard this story, looked at Carey across the table, looked at Bourdin across the table, and went, koosh, stamped the passport, like that game. What was that game that I used to play with the passports? It's like a Russian. What's that game called? I can see it in my mind perfectly, but I can't think of the name. I'm engagement farming right now. Also, the Spanish judge who had earlier given the shelter the 24-hour ultimatum heard a version of this as well. So did INS. So did everyone in the chain that followed. And after spending 3 hours with Bourdin and hearing his story, Carey confirmed that this was in fact her brother. She officially swore under oath that this was her brother. And the US consulate issued Bourdin a passport for Nicholas and let him go home. Up to this point, the Spanish judge, the US consulate, and the passport office have not, in fact, realized that this is not Nicholas Barclay. How? I don't know. I really don't understand. I really don't get it. It's like an adult man. And on the trip back to San Antonio, Carey is showing Nicholas pictures of their family as a way to jog his memory, I suppose. Try and remember what it was like before he went missing. It was very likely that Carey didn't realize she was providing Bourdin information to better help him fit in with his new family, basically feeding the imposter exactly what the imposter needs to be an imposter.
Are you wearing red because you're the imposter?
Yes. When they arrived in San Antonio, the majority of the family was there to greet him with one glaring omission. Jason, Nicholas' older brother, had not come. Beverly, his mom, came home from the airport with him in tow and put him back in the bedroom she had kept untouched for 3.5 years. Same posters, same clothes in the closet, same bed that Nicholas left. Years later, Beverly would say it directly. At that point, her main goal in life was not to think. She walked him into the room he had vanished from, and she did it knowing at some level, she would later admit, that the math didn't exactly add up. because they do, by the way, find out that this is not their son. Blue eyes don't become brown. Texas accents don't become French, unfortunately, fellas and fellettes. But all that being said, she had a son who had been missing for 3.5 years, and she had a son who had been delivered to her by the United States consulate from Madrid. So she chose the version of events to believe that she could survive. Bourdin did not return to live at home with his mom, Beverly, and his brother, Jason Dollarhide, but instead went with Carey. Carey, who at 31 had a husband, a 6-year-old son named Cody, and a life that had a shape to it before all of this. Brian Gibson, Carey's husband, worked steady hours. Cody was at the age where he didn't ask questions about why Uncle Nicholas had a French accent. The Gibson house was, for those 5 months, the only Barclay Dollarhide Gibson household that resembled a functional one. Bourdin learned the family at the speed someone learns a new language when they have to speak in public the next day. He memorized names, he memorized faces, he nodded when relatives said things that he had no reason at all to nod at, because he's not actually part of the family. He developed a careful repertoire of "I don't remember" responses to questions Nicholas should have absolutely known the answer to. And the family, every time, attributed the not remembering to the trauma of the kidnapping he had supposedly survived, which is a really evil lie. I'm just going to go out there and say that that's a f***ed-up thing to lie about. I think I've implied that multiple times already, but I really want to make it clear that it's abhorrent. All right, it's insane. This was the choice the entire family was making again and again in smaller and smaller increments. Each unrecognized face got attributed to trauma. Same with each missing detail, each foreign mannerism, every French slip-up. The story didn't really have to be true. It just had to keep being told in a sense. And it started from an official source. The US consulate gave this man a passport. This is Nicholas Barclay. Within 2 months, Bourdin was no longer feeling comfortable in this family. By mid-December, Bourdin had been Nicholas for about 6 weeks, and the strain of running the impersonation full-time in a family that was slowly starting to realize that he was impersonating the member of the family that had been missing for 3.5 years. He took Carey's car, he drove away to Oklahoma, the promised land, I like to call it. The story he tells here varies over its various retellings. He was looking for somewhere to disappear, and he was testing whether anyone would chase him. He was just scared overall. The car was eventually recovered, and Bourdin came back to San Antonio days before Christmas, walked out into the bathroom, and mutilated his own face.
So I took a razor blade and I slit my face.
Perhaps in an attempt to look more like Nicholas and less like Bourdin, and he was placed on a mental health hold.
I showed them that I was under a great deal of pressure.
And when he was released, his family obviously welcomed him back. It's a broken young man. Horrible things have happened to him. Nobody asked at this point the many, many obvious questions that are worth asking. How are all these things happening? Why does someone who survives this crazy kidnapping thing then run away again and cut their face up before Christmas? They just kept telling themselves the story that it was just trauma and it's unexplainable. It was during this time Bourdin was also going to high school to reintegrate with part of his past normal life.
It really became for me the American dream when I took that big yellow bus to go to school with others.
I just don't understand how that's even a thing that even could happen. I mean, this whole thing is crazy. It is insane. This is a crazy story that makes no sense at all. He still had a limited grasp of English. His behavior was bizarre and abnormal. He racked up a phone bill of nearly $2,000 calling France, never elaborating on who he was speaking to. The high school is its own level of institutional failure. Bourdin enrolled mid-year. Teachers were handed a transfer student who looked nothing like the yearbook photo from when Nicholas had attended a few years earlier. They had that photo on file. Nobody asked. The kid in their hallway did not speak English well. He spoke French. He had visible scars. He was older than he should have been by 6.5 years. As you could probably imagine, though, some of Nicholas' old friends did notice. Word got around among classmates, but the school administration, the counselors, the assistant principal who handled the transfer paperwork, none of them acted on it. 5 months in Carey's house, 5 months in a San Antonio high school, 5 months that the FBI, INS, Texas CPS, the school, and the State Department all failed to notice. And it is a fact that the return of Nicholas Barclay attracted a great deal of attention in the media. Due to this attention, Nicholas was asked to be interviewed for the TV show Hard Copy. The man doing the interview was Charlie Parker, a private investigator.
They set him up, put a microphone on him and had the cameras on him, and I moved over behind a booth, and it was almost fate.
Parker seemed to be the first person to look at Bourdin and then pictures of Nicholas and openly doubt that they were the same person, purely based on the shape of their ears.
I thought I had a spy. I thought I had a real, honest-to-God spy.
Parker then realized Nicholas didn't recognize family members in pictures he brought along with him. The voice was wrong, he didn't speak English, and this resulted in a detailed investigation led by Parker into the man that was impersonating the child, Nicholas, the missing child.
Number 2, okay. Number 3, okay. And number 4, okay. On the 5th one, I made a mistake.
Parker would go on to examine Nicholas' old room and found it had been untouched since he returned home, and what he found in the closet was 2 pairs of jeans and 2 shirts. That was the moment, Parker would later say, when he became convinced that Nicholas Barclay had been dead before he was ever reported missing. Parker consulted an ophthalmologist who confirmed that you can't just change somebody's eye color chemically, especially in the 90s. That's right, those purple eye people, they're not real, goofballs. He then talked to a dialect expert at Trinity University who informed him that even if Nicholas had picked up a French accent, his Texas accent would have returned at some point because he lived 13 years with one. Parker's other working theory was that the FBI didn't want him in this. Nancy Fisher, the FBI agent assigned to the Barclay case, had inherited 5 months of bureaucratic momentum that said Nicholas Barclay was home and the case was closed. Oh, imagine having to actually do your job. Bourdin had a passport, a social security card, a high school transcript. The State Department had stamped him as an American. INS had cleared the stamp. Fisher would later say on camera that something about Bourdin had felt wrong from the first interview, but the official paperwork said otherwise. So for those 5 months, Fisher and Parker were working on the same cases from opposite sides. Parker outside the FBI trying to break it open, and Fisher from inside the FBI trying to figure out how to do the same thing without ruining her own life, because you can't bite the hand that feeds, obviously. Parker arranged to meet Nicholas at a basketball court near the Dollarhide house, brought family photos, showed up alone. Bourdin sat down, Parker handed him the first photo. Bourdin did not recognize the face. He didn't recognize the next 2 photos either. The voice, completely wrong. The ears, completely wrong. Eyes, we already know, they're completely wrong. When Bourdin spoke, he was French. He was a French, adult French man. Parker would later say, I know one thing. You're not Nicholas Barclay, and I'm gonna stay with you until I figure out who you are. Parker informed the FBI of his conclusion, and Parker would later say that the FBI threatened him with obstruction of justice. But at this point, multiple systems had confirmed, officially, on record, federally, bureaucratically, that Bourdin was Nicholas Finkel's Einhorn. All right, guys, what the Parker was just digging shit up and making an issue where the government had decided there was none. They were also taking the sex slave ring story seriously and wanted to call Nicholas in for questioning. Nicholas. The FBI then conducted a brief interview with Bourdin posing as Nicholas to gauge the authenticity of his claims, the sex trafficking claims.
I was pulling teeth trying to determine who had kidnapped Nicholas, when and where, and under what circumstances. I had almost no information.
Because we have to gauge the authenticity of those claims. Not the claims that this is even the right kid, it's just the claims of the sex trafficking ring. It'd be insane if there was one of those being run by the government. Fisher, the FBI rep, would later say the interview itself was what convinced her. Bourdin described the sex ring at length, but couldn't produce a single verifiable specific. Not a name, not a base, not anything that someone could actually verify and check. It was starting to seem like this guy was full of shit. The story was way too specific, but just empty in detail. Fisher took notes and did not contradict him in the room. When the interview ended, she walked out and started the paperwork for a court order. Fisher came away from the questioning convinced that Bourdin was not Nicholas and asked Beverly for a DNA test as well as placing a court order for fingerprints. They needed Beverly because all existing legal records had concluded at this point that Bourdin was Nicholas Finkel's Einhorn, and thus he was legally a child, even though he's a middle-aged man. Not really, mid-20s is not middle-aged. If that's middle-aged, but I am old. I'm almost 30 years old. Isn't that crazy? Press like. The only way to get Nicholas' DNA would be through parental permission because he's a minor. Remember, he's a minor. He's not a liar. He's not an imposter. He's just a little kid running around. Eventually, Fisher would return with a warrant for both blood and prints. Shortly after this, Beverly would call the police and Parker to share that she no longer believed Bourdin was Nicholas. The final straw was when she drove him to his old middle school and he did not seem to recognize it. What about all the other shit? Anyways, Parker would come and help calm Bourdin down after his ruse was finally uncovered. He would take Bourdin out to breakfast, and over pancakes, Bourdin would tell him, "My name is Frédéric Bourdin, and I'm wanted by Interpol."
And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Frédéric Bourdin, and I'm wanted by Interpol."
What are you talking about?
Go to sour.gg.
Zulk jump scare. I have a candy company. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but I'm sorry. We release 4 new flavors every single month. We actually have some jalapeno gummies, some spicy mango gummies. They're really good. Also join the Gump Club if you want to see uncensored videos with clips like this that I record and then have my editor Tara edit out because they make me look bad. Forgot that I was recording. We're building a community out there on the Gump Club. All right, guys. We got other videos. Too Late Show. It's a show that I do with my wife. All kinds of funny moments and shit. Support the channel. Support these things. Gump.club. Sour.gg. Also, making a video game. It is the spiritual successor to Fallout New Vegas. Yes, I just said that with a straight face. Will it ever be released? Maybe not. Will the other one that I was working on ever be released? Probably in a month or 2. All right, maybe 3 months. I'm not exactly sure. I've got too many jobs. Anyways.
My name is Frédéric Bourdin, and I am wanted by Interpol.
He said it probably like that. Parker would say later that what he remembered most was the matter-of-factness of it. Bourdin said the line the way someone admits that they've been bluffing in a card game. Like the game's over and there's no more point in pretending.
You got me. I am not a little boy from America.
Now, it's important to note that Bourdin has claimed that these events never occurred, claiming that Parker is a man who loves attention and the real liar. Parker's the real liar, not the serial imposter. Parker would excuse himself to the bathroom and phone the FBI, who instructed him to keep Bourdin there for as long as possible. Beverly would aid in bringing in Bourdin, and after the FBI took the fingerprints, they would pass along to the State Department and lastly, Interpol. Ultimately, the entire series of events resulted in the same outcome. Interpol finally had Frédéric Pierre Bourdin.
This is the tale of a master imposter who managed to lie his way into the United States and prey upon the most vulnerable of people.
It doesn't end there. After the arrest and during the trial, Bourdin would allege that Beverly and Jason, Nicholas' mom and brother, were originally involved in Nicholas' disappearance, and that Jason had a history of cocaine use and violent behavior. He was the last person to speak to Nicholas, and he was also the last person to see Nicholas alive. If he did, in fact, of course, see Nicholas that night trying to break into the garage in September of 1994, but that was obviously well after he went missing originally, and it could have been an hallucinations. Eventually, Jason would die, and shortly after Jason's death, Jack Stick, a federal prosecutor in the state of Texas, opened up Nicholas' disappearance as a homicide. Beverly would go on to take a series of polygraph tests. She passed the first 2, but failed the 3rd in a dramatic fashion, having taken it by her own later admission on heroin, methadone, and alcohol. On the 3rd test, the machine indicated deception. Beverly's response then and later was that she'd taken it while still using, and that the machine couldn't tell the difference between guilt and being too high to give a clean reading, which I don't think you're supposed to take polygraph tests while high, and I don't think that they're admissible in court. For example, the FBI filed the results. Polygraphs aren't admissible in court, and these alone weren't enough to charge anyone with anything. After Nicholas' disappearance, the police were called to break up fights between Jason and Beverly multiple times. Fisher and Parker each took these claims fairly seriously, questioning Jason about the case and finding him uncooperative. And Parker has said publicly that during his questioning, he told Jason that he believed that he, Jason, had killed Nicholas by accident. Shortly after this, Jason would die from a cocaine overdose, leaving just Beverly to deal with these claims. By the way, it's pretty difficult to overdose on cocaine. Parker would also ask Beverly if she thinks Jason took his own life using the drugs, as he had been clean for up to a year at that point, and her response was, I don't know. Carey, the most stable of all the family members, defended her mother and brother. She does not believe that Bourdin's story has an ounce of credibility, as he is kind of an untrustworthy guy. It would be ridiculous to go and find someone to pretend to be Nicholas 4 years later to cover up the fact that they had killed him if they did, when no one had even thought that they did. It just seemed like they sort of wanted their son and brother and family member back, is what it seems like to me. Bourdin is not an honest, trustworthy guy. He is what specialists have inferred, a compulsive liar and a maniac. I mean, he's the imposter. The trial went into September of 1998, and Bourdin pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury. He was sentenced to 6 years, which is 3 times the recommended sentencing guidelines, which is good. Contrary to his television appearance 5 years earlier, this time his claim that he just wanted love was met with outrage. The judge compared what Bourdin did to a murder, to making it appear as though Nicholas was missing all over again. This judge's argument was that Bourdin had effectively erased Nicholas Barclay a second time, which I would argue that is factual. That is my read on this entire situation. The family had spent 3.5 years not knowing and grieving a loss of a brother and son. Then for 5 months, they had been allowed to believe their son was home because of a serial imposter freak, Frenchman. And then on the day that Bourdin's fingerprints came back, they had to go through the loss a second time. The judge framed Bourdin's deception as a deliberate act of cruelty that had taken something from the Barclay family that they would never recover. Per Grand's reporting on the sentencing, what Bourdin got was more than 3 times what the federal guidelines recommended for passport fraud and perjury. Parker is still trying to find any trace of Nicholas. So far, there have been no leads, and the film The Imposter, released in 2012, draws heavily from David Grand's 2008 New Yorker article on the case, the one that pushed the Jason killed Nicholas theory into the documentary's frame. Parker does not believe that Nicholas did die before he disappeared, but he doesn't know if the Dollar Hides had anything to do with it. After all, Bourdin still insists that the family was involved. In a 2012 interview, Bourdin said, "If the FBI kept them for 2 or 3 days inside a closed cell and put some pressure on them, they would find Nicholas. I'm convinced of that. I know that."
I didn't need to be Columbo to put all the pieces together. They killed him. Some of them did it, some of them knew of it, and some of them choose to ignore it.
That seems defamatory, if you ask me. When Bart Layton was filming The Imposter, the production hired Parker to dig the backyard of the old Dollar Hide house looking for a body. There's footage in the film of Parker in his 70s by then, standing in a hole. The dig produced nothing. Whatever happened to Nicholas Barclay in June of 1994 is more than 30 years later still unanswered. The case is technically open, and the Charlie Project still lists Nicholas as missing. Bourdin was released from U.S. prison in 2003 and deported back to the France area of the world. The cycle started up again almost immediately. In 2004, he turned up in Grenoble and took the name Léo Balley, a 6.5-year-old French boy who had vanished in 1996 during a camping trip at Lac Fourcheux in the Isère, which is a region south of Grenoble. Léo had walked off with his father's group towards a waterfall a kilometer from the camp and never came back. He was never found, and the Balley family had spent 7 years not knowing. They were briefly pulled into believing their missing 6-year-old had come home until DNA testing established that the person claiming to be Léo was Frédéric Bourdin. This was the second family that he did it to in a very short period of time. A French court sentenced him to 24 months in prison, 4 of which he served. Then came Ruben Sanchez Espinoza in 2004, who got him deported. Then Francisco Hernandez Fernandez in 2005. And then on May 3rd, 2005, a Frenchman, Bourdin again, called a Spanish hotline and reported a missing teenager around 15 years old. It just continues. For a while, it worked too. By 2005, Bourdin had gotten better at blending in with teenagers, and no one was the wiser. He's like a 45-year-old man at this point. It wasn't until June 8th of that year that a TV show aired a segment that finally exposed him. And after his release, he met a young French woman studying to be a lawyer named Isabelle, and they married on August 8th, 2007, and have 5 children together. In March of 2017, Bourdin would claim on Facebook that Isabelle had left him for another man, and that she had been unhappy for the entirety of their relationship. Bourdin had also claimed in 2012 that he would never impersonate someone again. And where he is exactly at this time, right now of recording this, it is unknown and unanswered. He could be in Serbia pretending to be a Serbian child. So, Serbian viewers, keep an eye out. The imposters out there. We do know there is a 2023 French custody order out of Ille-Vilaine forbidding Bourdin from contacting his own children. So he's not allowed to talk to his children, no family contact permitted. But he still posts about his kids on his TikTok anyway. So if you stumbled onto the account cold without context, you'd see a strange divorced Frenchman who misses his kids. You wouldn't see the man who has spent his life walking into shelters and claiming to be other people's missing children and is now no longer allowed to see his kids. What a crazy liar. Everybody lies, to be fair. There's lies of omission, lies to keep people happy, white lies. We've all lied, but there are few of us in society who tell the vast majority of lies. Their lies function as truth others accept, and without challenging those lies, the truth can hurt the people who know. You got to think about Carey Gibson, the Barclay family, and how they just wanted their brother and son back in their life, and then they got him back for months. But the brother that Carey got back was not Nicholas, and he lied for a while. And then he went to prison, and then Nicholas was still missing. It's horrible. Anyways, that's the story of the imposter. Hopefully you guys enjoyed and are freaked out, because it's really freaky. If you did enjoy, press the like button down below. I'll see you in the next video.